2023 Strategic Initiatives Committee meeting. As chair of this committee, I must remind all members of their duty under the State Government Ethics Act to avoid conflicts of interest and appearances of conflicts of interest. If you know of any conflict or appearance of conflict with respect to any matter coming before the committee today, please identify it at this time. None seen. Mr. Recorder, can you call the roll?
Chair Jones.
Here.
Vice Chair White. Here. Mr. Bryan. Mr. Davis.
Present.
Mr. Cotis. Here. Mr. Meekins. Here. And Mr. Bullock.
Here.
Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Great. Thank you. Before we begin, I would like a quick show of hands for the following questions. Number one, how many people know why UNC had athletic fields and a pool named after the Navy? Oh, I'll come back to the numbers. Sorry. Okay, good number. Or a building previously named Navy Hall. Good number. Or a World War II era snack bar affectionately called the Scuttlebutt. And finally, how many people know the integration of the modern U.S. Navy and arguably the University and town of Chapel Hill began with the B-1 Band, a group of African-American sailors originally stationed in Chapel Hill? I actually didn't know that. Until recently, like a number of other students, alumni, and friends of the university, I was only superficially aware of the Navy's impact on our university's modern development from an infrastructure, reputational, and cultural standpoint. Simply put, one can present a strong case that today's Carolina would be vastly different had the Navy selected a different home for their East Coast pre-flight program in 1942. Today, with the help of several notable guests, we are going to celebrate that history. We are also going to discuss ways the university can better support our ROTC units in achieving their mission of service to our state and our nation. Joining us today are Ann Keene. Ann is from Hickory, North Carolina. After graduating from the School of Journalism at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, her parents' alma mater, she worked in radio, television, documentary production, later serving as a press secretary, speechwriter in both Congress and a presidential administration. Today, she runs a communications firm in Austin, Texas, with a focus on healthcare. She is also an author specializing in narrative nonfiction. Her recent book, The Cloudbuster 9, was a finalist for the Casey Award for the Best Baseball Book of the Year. She has shared her story about UNC's Navy fighter pilot baseball team manned by major leaguers with national audience at the Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown, the Boston Red Sox, C-SPAN's American History Book Talk, North Carolina Book Watch, and the National World War II Museum in New Orleans, the General George C. Marshall Foundation, and Naval Academy chapters. Ann's work has appeared in the New York Times, History, A&E, Marine Corps, and Navy Times, and daily newspapers, including the Raleigh News and Observer and the Charlotte Observer. She also appeared in a recent wartime baseball documentary about Ted Williams, Joe DiMaggio, and George H.W. Bush. Back in Texas, Ann supports the Texas Book Festival, the State Library and Archives, and swims for Longhorn Aquatic Masters at the University of Texas. Pamela Carlson is a native of Greensboro, North Carolina. She is the daughter of a B-1 band member, Walter F. Carlson, Jr., and the niece of band member John E. Carlson. Ms. Carlson is a retired band director from the public schools of Robeson County and is currently employed by North Carolina A&T State University. Ms. Carlson enjoys spending time with her granddaughter, Madison, and spending weekends relaxing at Baden Lake. As well as Nick Graham. Nicholas Graham is a UNC-Chapel Hill University archivist. He has worked in Wilson's Special Collections Library for 20 years. He is an alumnus of the UNC School of Information and Library Science and co-author with Cecilia Moore of the book UNC A to Z, What Every Tar Heel Needs to Know About the First State University. I would also like to recognize Marianne Waldrop and Rob Rivers, who have been very active in the Armory Alumni Organization, as well as other interested alumni and B1 band relatives joining us via the live stream. Finally, I would like to recognize Joe Mingle. Mr. Mingle graduated from Chapel Hill in 1942. He is a U.S. Army veteran and was present on campus during the pre-flight era. Today is Joe's 102nd birthday. Another round of applause. And he is here today with his family. Pam, Ann, and Nick, thank you for your time with us this afternoon.
Thank you very much. It's a real honor to be here this afternoon, and graduated many years ago. And again, it's a real honor to share some unique history about the Navy. I guess we'll get right on with the slide presentation. Click here. Okay. Now, I met Joe Mingle 5 or 6 years ago when I was working on the book, and you can see the bell tower here at Carolina being buzzed by P-47 Thunderbolt aircraft. That was an image that Joe shared with me. So again, during World War II, the university functioned as a Navy pre-flight school. There were only 5 of these schools in the country at the time. And I'm going to tell you a story about how I discovered this story with a slideshow of rare images, thanks to the university's Wilson Library in the archives. So with that being said, Frank Porter Graham was really, I would say, the master designer behind the school. And this is the story of Navy pre-flight. First of all, I've asked Ramsey to help me pass around some beautiful souvenirs. This is an example of one of the postcards created. The Navy had its own newspaper, but it also had its own art studio where they designed these beautiful collectible postcards, which I got on eBay. And she's going to pass around some scrapbooks, memorabilia, and I actually have a baseball card with Ted Williams and Babe Ruth, which was produced during this time in 1943, which my book is focused on. But again, this is an example. You see scenes from Navy pre-flight here. I'm going to talk about what the Navy did for Carolina and what Carolina did for the Navy. This is the Carolina Inn, 1943, in a scene of cadets during their leisure. And I want to say that this was one of the most difficult Navy training programs in the country of its time. They used sports primarily and hard labor to train the cadets, and they were amongst the first, quote, Top Gun pilots. That was a term not used at the time, but they were the first pilots making carrier landings in the Pacific. They came through pre-flight for that formative training to make sure that they had the right stuff to do the job. And this is that story. So my grandfather was the skipper of the base for 2 years. He's in the center there. That's taken at the football field. My father was the bat boy and the child mascot around age 9 and 10. And of course, when your father's the commander, that was a little perk. When my father passed away about 6 years ago, he had gone to Carolina. He pitched to Carolina. He was an All-American pitcher. He pitched for the Durham Bulls. And when he died, I wanted to tell the story really about the highlight of his life when he was a little boy and the bat boy for the Cloudbuster baseball team. And again, I want to remind you, they were major leaguers. Most of the players on the team, they were major leaguers training to become fighter pilots. So you think about that combination, pausing their careers like Ted Williams, Johnny Pesky, John Sain, some of the most famous players of all time. So when he passed away, I found this scrapbook. This is one of the beautiful pictures. My grandfather, flanked by some of the naval officers. This is the commissioning ceremony, again, at the football field when they opened the base in 1943. Now, you want to wonder, how did the base come to Chapel Hill? There is Frank Porter Graham with his dear friend, Eleanor Roosevelt. That was right after Pearl Harbor was bombed, I believe. And he gave her a tour of the campus. And all along, before Pearl Harbor was bombed, Frank Porter Graham, he knew the war was coming. he knew the university was perfect for a training base. And there she is again. I believe this is at Memorial Hall, but with her dear friend Porter Graham before the war broke out. And sure enough, Chapel Hill was designated as the fifth and final pre-flight base. It was the East Coast base, and it was close to Washington. So they called it the gym of pre-flight. So again, this is really the job that they were training for. And this is how the story was preserved. After my dad passed away, I told the story at the funeral, and people who went to Carolina were shocked. They had never heard of Navy pre-flight. And I came here to Carolina, went into Wilson Library. This is one of the first images that popped up. This was Kid Brewer, famous name for Duke football. Kid Brewer Stadium in Appalachian. He was a renowned football player, but he was the Navy publicist. Kid Brewer filmed everything. He took thousands of absolutely gorgeous pictures, which I used to write my book. But this is a typical scene. And I have a surprise for you at the end of my presentation. It's one of the most rare films ever, and you will actually see the cadets in action in 1943, thanks to Kid, filmed on this day by Fox Movie Tone. This is the airport. Again, Chapel Hill was designated as a Navy pre-flight base because they had an airport and they had sports fields ready to go. And one of the reasons they were able to sell the university is if you look at the sports fields from the aerial images, everything was there. It was ready to go. And the Navy just basically moved in and started with the training. Now, some of the buildings that were built during the time of Navy pre-flight include the Armory. These are the historic renderings from the architect. I believe his name was Archie Davis. Here's another building, Kessing Pool. It's still here. It has the anchors and tiles on the bottom of the pool. Another one was the Navy Infirmary, and it's still here over by the medical school campus. And then here is really the first day of training, what a day in the life of Navy pre-flight would have looked like. So they had about 2,000 cadets shipping in and out every 2 weeks, and they would come in their business attire, in buses and the trains, and then they would move into the dorms. So basically, the Navy commandeered something they called Hell's Half Acre. They took over a good acre of the campus and all the sports fields. And these boys moved in. I believe this is Lewis Dorm. And if you look up in the corner, that's actually the configuration of what a model cadet dorm looked like. And if you look on the ceiling, you will see airplanes hanging, the little resin collectible airplanes. They were all over campus, and you'll be seeing these in the images. But again, the Navy, they came in, they whitewashed the walls of the dorm, took all the posters off, and it literally became a Navy base overnight. Now, this is one of my favorite pictures. If you look behind them, it's Will and Jim and the bell tower. I believe George Bush may have been in this picture, and I'll get into some of the famous people who trained here later. But this was an airplane parked behind Alexander Dorm, and they used this for instrument training. Now, this is on the steps of Navy Hall or the Armory, and those are sextants. That is for celestial navigation. So again, the school was sports training. It was long before the Navy SEALs. It had that bravado about it. It was the most difficult physical training program of its kind, but they also had academics. They had courses like celestial navigation here for pilots. Now, one thing you might not know is the cadets built roads, they installed walls, they installed the drains under Finley Golf Course. That's where this was taken. And so they basically, again, built a lot of the infrastructure during the war, and this was part of the labor, the training. They also had their own victory garden, and they grew their own food for the base. And on Thanksgiving, they shot their own turkeys. They went out in the woods. Survival training was a big part of the culture, but look here, growing their own vegetables. Now, when I discovered this story, that is my grandfather, and the gentleman beside him is Eddie Rickenbacker, the ace of all aces during World War I. He had been he was in an airplane crash, I believe in 1942, and he was in another crash later that year, a second one. He was on a life raft, I believe, for about 3 weeks, and obviously he survived. But he was a race car driver, the ace of aces during World War I. And during Navy pre-flight, they would have dignitaries like Rickenbacker come onto campus to give the cadets a pep talk. So this is one of the first images I found. It's at the baseball field with my grandfather giving Rickenbacker a tour. And that's when I knew I really had something. Now, some of the famous people on campus, I believe this was Louis Dorm, George Bush, Gerald Ford was a football coach and a boxing coach. He was an instructor here. He lived down in a house near Finley Golf Course, and then Ronald Reagan came through as an entertainer. Now, Kate Smith, God bless America. She was a good friend of Jim Crowley, one of the football coaches. You can see them there. And she came and performed in 1943 here on campus. Now, here's another picture of a classroom where you'll see the familiar Navy planes. They not only took beautiful black and white images, they had artists come down from New York, from magazines like the New Yorker. This one was done by Don Freeman. He was a children's book illustrator who illustrated Corduroy the Bear, but these are now on display up at the Navy Yard in Washington, D.C. Now, the B-1 band, Perrin mentioned this earlier, and Pamela Carlson is here. Her father would have been in this picture. This is just a fantastic story. And the band broke the color barrier, rising from ranks of messmen to enlisted members of the band. And this band actually became one of the largest bands in the Pacific. These are the pictures that we found at Wilson Library, where they marched through campus every day. They raised the flag. And this is really important, and I want to stop here. Many of the officers who came to run this training base were from the Northeast. They were from New England. My grandfather was from Pennsylvania, but they were very pro-integration, if you will, and they wanted to see the band members succeed, and they worked very closely with them. I mean, they depended on them for the morale every day, so they developed a very close kinship with them. The African-American band, they actually had their own baseball team, and they had their own fantastic basketball team during the war. Now, a huge part of being a Navy pilot, especially in the Pacific, was if you crashed down, you had to survive on air, land, and sea. Now, this was a familiar scene where cadets would march through campus. And this is an interesting shot because that is the map that they would give all the cadets, and they would often drop them 20 miles off campus. And they'd say, you got 2 days to get back. And when they went through the woods, if you can see this, they often had to catch their own food. It wasn't like they could stop at Chick-fil-A on their 20-mile hike back to Carolina. This was all the work that they had to do to pass this course. And they often caught snakes, and that's what they subsisted on. You can see one of these photos here. Now, another thing, it's a little trivia fact. The campus was overrun by stray dogs during World War II. And they were constantly in pictures with the cadets running. It actually became a meme. Now, here's some of, again, one of the beautiful postcards. The athletics, that is what my book mainly focused on. I would say there were 5 pre-flight campuses. There were hundreds of Olympians, Heisman Trophy winners, major leaguers, minor leaguers, professional football players, and the biggest stars of college football, of course, with Coach Bear Bryant, trained at these bases. And they also created what I would call a comic book culture. As you can see, they were the models for magazines for kids. So they really were their American idols during the war. Now, some of the most famous coaches in the country paused their careers to come and train the Navy pilots. The first top corner is Larry Snyder, who was Jesse Owens' track coach, was a pre-flight coach. John Wooden, of course, Bud Wilkinson, Charlie Gehringer played for the Detroit Tigers, and then Jim Crowley, of course, the famous football coach from Fordham. Now, this was a typical scene. You'll see the commanders on the base, but they're flanked by Don George. He was the world wrestling champion. They had, again, Olympic boxers, college football coaches, but this is a typical scene of what a day in the life would have looked like on campus throughout the war. Now, I stress that this was one of the toughest physical training programs during the war, and it was. They had 4 ambulances parked on base at all time, and I was told that 3 were usually gone transporting cadets. Several cadets died. Every day they broke bones, but that was just part of the training. This I find kind of amusing, but this is what you would have seen if you were walking around campus one day, just right outside the dorm. This is hand-to-hand combat. And then if you look at the physical shape of the cadets, they were in pristine condition. Here's another one. These are beautiful images. And they often had boxing matches. Again, it was all built on competition. And then this is called a German wheel, and it's just training for G-force and balance to become a pilot. And then you'll see Ted Williams with Johnny Pesky, 2 famous Red Sox, and John Sain, who pitched for the New York Yankees. I mean, they did use the professional athletes for publicity. And here's another beautiful image up at Navy Yard by one of the artists. Here is Bear Bryant flanked by the football team. And I'll tell you, Navy Pre-Flight produced some of the most competitive football teams really ever, not just during the war, but they could beat almost any college in the country during the war. Now, here's one of the programs, and I'm passing around a few of these right now. But again, Navy Pre-Flight games were really popular, and they invested in artwork and programs to boost morale. And then these are some of the images that I found in my family's scrapbook. This is Johnny Pesky, Buddy Hassett, first baseman for the New York Yankees, and of course, Johnny Pesky, who played for the Red Sox. And I'll pause here. You know, that some of the most famous athletes in the world were here, but it would be like Michael Phelps, Derek Jeter, LeBron James being here today. And you think about, how do you hide someone like that? They were just part of the culture. They lived in the dorms. They were average Joes like everyone else. And it just tells you about how much they wanted to serve their country. Now, my dad is the little boy in the center, and most of these players, or a good half of them, were major leaguers with every team: the Indians, the Red Sox, the Yankees. And again, they were pausing their careers to serve their country. This was on the wall of our den, and this is how the story was born. I wanted to tell the story about the highlight of his life, and he's with Ted Williams and Johnny Pesky. This was actually used for Navy publicity. I think it was actually used in an ad for Stars and Stripes and circulated in the Pacific to make people want to do this job, to become pilots. This is my dad with the little Johnny Morris, I believe, the tobacco mascot. He was frequently on campus, and he came down. He had a little MG that he would drive, and he was in a lot of the publicity images. And then the highlight of my book in terms of baseball, I will tell you, the Cloudbusters, they were the name of the team here, largely manned by major leaguers. They played in a war relief game in New York at Yankee Stadium in 1943. I'm not going to tell you the final score, but Babe Ruth came out, and he managed the team that the Cloudbusters played, and they were a blend of Yankees and Indians players. Now, this is an interesting card. This is one of Ted Williams' Fleer baseball cards that was from Chapel Hill. And I stop here because, and I'm going to circulate a sample of one of these cards. The Navy was always here, backing our country, backing our school. And they're right there standing behind America and one of the most famous hitters and players of all time. And if you flip that card over, it tells you about Chapel Hill being a pre-flight base. And this picture actually was of Babe Ruth and Ted Williams behind the scenes in the locker room. I think that was right after the Cloudbuster game. And that was the first time Ted Williams ever asked anyone to sign an autographed ball. And that day, Babe Ruth signed that ball. Now, there's a little funny anecdotes. And right here, we're in the Carolina Inn today. And Doris Duke, the richest woman in America, obviously, the patron of Duke Tobacco, she lived at the Carolina Inn during the war, and she worked in a lab down the street as an infectious disease technician, I believe. And it was rumored that she planned her divorce here at the Carolina Inn. And the Daily Tar Heel actually would follow her around, and they wrote a story about her, and they published her telephone number, the Carolina Inn, in the newspaper, and she was really upset about that. So I'm going to conclude with this. This is a watercolor portrait. Again, I said that the Navy had its own graphic design studio. They had cartoons, they had a newspaper, and this gentleman was, his name was Eugene Aiello. He was from New York City, and he had worked for Paramount Pictures, I believe, before the war. He took pictures of people like, Lucille Ball. He photographed some of the most famous movie stars of all time, but they put him to work creating what became the archetypical Navy pre-flight portrait of a graduate. I believe it's called the Wings Emblem graduate. And if you look, you see him graduating, but he's flanked by athletes in athletic gear. And that painting hung on the wall, I believe, of the Monogram Club during the war. So I will conclude with that. And I have a surprise for you. I mentioned Fox Movie Tone was here. I would say very, very, very few people have seen this glimpse of North Carolina. Now, no, Joe Mingle remembers it because he was there when this was filmed. But if you could maybe dim the lights and show this film segment, this was Carolina during the war. Thank you very much. I'm honored. I'm happy to take any questions. If anyone has any questions.
Does anyone have any questions? I mean, and this has been a real, this has been a fantastic journey. I mean, there's been discussion on campus about the armory, and that was kind of what opened the door for me to learn more about how our university benefited from the Navy's involvement. That started by reading your book, Cloudbuster 9, and then finding another book by an author named Alex Albright about the B-1 band. And if I'm not sure if people in the room or people listening are big readers, but I highly encourage everyone to get a copy of both of those books and read them. It is, they offer just an incredible glimpse into really what has made our university the modern university that we all know and love. I don't think that Carolina would be the same today had it not been for pre-flight. And that's, again, true from an infrastructure standpoint, from a reputational standpoint, and truly from a cultural standpoint. I don't think that we would be the same place now had we not been a pre-flight location. Does anyone have any questions? I mean, Ann, I think I got in touch with you through Facebook, if I'm not mistaken, or maybe through your website. I met, and I'd like to really point out Ms. Carlson. So her cousin works at up in New York at is it CUNY?
I'm sorry.
Is it SUNY? Is it CUNY up in New York?
I think it is.
Well, I found, I was looking at, I was trying to find B1 band member relatives, looked on Facebook, and I'm not usually on Facebook, but looked on Facebook, tracked him down, found out where he worked, called his office and left a message. And thankfully he called me back, which is how I was able to get in touch with a number of the B1 relatives, which was, I mean, anyway, it was just incredibly interesting to be able to do that. And it was just fantastic to be able to meet you and your cousin. Does anyone have any questions for? Sure, absolutely.
I would like to also, again, I'm Pam Carlson, and I am the daughter of Walter F. Carlson and niece of John Carlson, who were B1 band members. And we also have S.Y. Mason and Gail Mason, if they will stand and you want to come forward. They are the daughters of band member John Mason. I will go ahead and pass this around. This is the and this is the Cloud Buster booklet that is just about to be one. One thing that I would like to say is the importance of a band in military. They are at every passing review, and you saw how the band marched here on campus as the cadets were going back and forth to their classes. They had to march 2 miles every day, one way, twice a day, in order to get to campus, because they were not allowed to live on campus. They lived at the Hargrave Center, which is located, I think it's considered to be Carrboro. And so we have a historical marker that has been erected on one of the corners where they used to pass by every day. But as I think about it, there's no real connection with that historical marker that shows why they were there. And I think there needs to be more of a connection with what they did with the Navy at Carolina and why they were actually here for the pre-flight. Ann talked about some of the great people that were in the pre-flight school. I would just like to mention a couple of from the B1 Navy band. One is their band director, James Parsons, was actually the first district African-American district judge in the Illinois. He was appointed by John Kennedy. Excuse me. Walter Hayth became an OGBYN in Kansas, and he was a member of the nation's first all-Black multi-specialty practice. Roger Holt became a nationally renowned podiatrist and surgeon. Roy Lake became the first Black engineer at the Navy Yard in Washington, D.C. John Mason, their father, became the first Black purchasing agent for the city of Durham. I'm sorry.
County of Durham.
Okay, County of Durham.
For the Department of Social Service.
Okay, and in 1981, the U.S. Navy School of Music awarded honorary degrees to the band. And another thing that was so unique about this band is that they did not go through the Navy School of Music. They were such talented musicians that the only thing they had to do was to go through regular Navy training. The majority of these musicians came from North Carolina A&T. 26 of them were either students or recent graduates. 4 came from North Carolina Central. 9 came from Dudley High School in Greensboro. 4 came from Durham Hillside. We had 4 that came from Hampton Institute, 1 from South Carolina State, 1 from Johnson C. Smith. So these were educated bands musicians. Another thing that was unique to the B-1 Navy Band was that they stayed together as an entire unit the entire time they were in the Navy. They came here, they left here, they went to Hawaii, and then when the war was over, they were discharged. You saw the book that was written by Alex Albright, and also Dr. Gregory Drain, who's the band director at Penn State, wrote his dissertation on B-1.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to bring special attention to the significance of B-1 U.S. Navy Band. Some of this may have been mentioned by Ms. Keene, but I think it's especially of note to recognize the significance. In May of 1942, 44 Black men were commissioned into the United States Navy by then Governor Broughton. They were the first group of Black men to enter the Navy with general classification. They were not messmen. They were not stewards. They were musicians. That is extremely significant, not only in the history of North Carolina, but in the history of the United States, the history of the world. They were the first. Not until 1981 were these gentlemen officially recognized and commemorated by the United States Navy. That's a long time to go unrecognized. That's a long time to be forgotten. The exceptional musicianship of these men, and by the way, all of them were not in college. Our dad, John Mason, along with Thomas Sellers and a handful of others, including Calvin Morrow, were seniors in high school. They did not get to participate in their high school graduation, which for many people is a culminating event. They had to take their exams early to be commissioned with this group. Every band member had to play 2 instruments. We're proud to say that our dad was one of the handful. Not only was he one of the youngest members of the band, but he played 3. French horn, trumpet, and E-flat alto sax. We never saw him play any of those instruments. our dad passed away at the age of 92 in 2016. And I said to him prior to his passing, do you realize how much money you could have made playing saxophone? That was not his desire once he left the Navy Band. He did go on, as Pam stated, he became the first Black purchasing agent for the Department of Social Services in Durham County. His beginning at the department was as a custodian. The director of the Department of Social Services and our dad became friends. He saw the talent, and we have documentation of his receiving that status from documents from Raleigh. It is extremely important that the significance of this band not be forgotten. Mr. Calvin Morrow, Dr. Morrow, was the last surviving member of B1. He passed away in January of 2021. In December of 2020 saw the passing of Simeon Holloway. So the two of them had been together as the last surviving members of the band for quite some time before Mr. Holloway passed away following his 100th birthday. when we think about World War II veterans, there are so many men and women who are forgotten. And it is our hope that the true significance of B1 is not forgotten and is documented in the history of this university. Now, I stand here in Blue Country. I have to say, I hold two papers from the illustrious North Carolina State University in Raleigh. However, I did have to come on this campus to take some of my classes in my master's program. I own up to it. But my sister is a proud graduate of this university from the School of Pharmacy. There are others of us throughout the Navy Band family that fully appreciate and understand the significance of our dad's service to this country. And when you're thinking about the time in 1942, this was before the passage of the Civil Rights Act. This was before people who look like us were allowed to vote in this country, in this state. So I'm saying all of this to say, think about the impact that this group of brave, courageous men made, the mark they've left, not only on their families and their friends and their communities, but the mark that they've made on this state, on this university's campus, that they weren't allowed to live on, that they weren't allowed to eat on, that they weren't allowed to take a break, have a nap, all of that. The back and forth that was required of them to march here, to march back, twice a day, because of arbitrary standards that should not be allowed to permeate this country any longer. So thank you very much.
Ms. Mason, thank you for both making the trip over today and your words here in front of everyone.
And may I just say that my last name is Mason Watson, and I have a 6'5", 260 husband home that I want to make sure the last name is Mason Watson.
It's Mason Watson. Mason Watson. Does anyone have any questions or any comments?
This has been an incredible history lesson for me, and I hope for many of you today. And thanks to all of you, Ms. Mason Watson, Ms. Keene, Ms. Carlson, Nick Graham. I got a question for you before I'm finished. But one of the things that, and last week I got to meet two proud Tar Heels, meeting an incredible 102-year-old today, proud Tar Heel, Mr. Mangle. Last week in my office, along with Captain Hertel, I got to meet Lieutenant General George Smith, who I think did commissioning on Saturday, correct? A little later on Friday, had a chance to meet Colonel Rich Martin, who spoke at the Carolina Red, White, and Blue graduation ceremony for our honoring our veterans who are graduating and graduates of veterans. That was an amazing ceremony. But the one common thread, whether it's Mr. Mangle here today, General George Smith, I think class of 83, if I remember, maybe a little earlier, 85, and Colonel Rich Martin, I think was maybe 88 or 89. They're proud of having been have a diploma on their wall from University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Proud to have trained here. Proud to have trained in the Army and on the same fields that the President Bush and others. And thank you for this wonderful gift, Anne. I will frame it and put it in my office. This is the honoring Ted Williams. And so thank you for sharing that with me. But I think to be proud of Carolina and the way that you all are. I look out my window every day at the old well, see a lot of people taking pictures, especially over the past few weeks in their Carolina blue caps and gowns. And I'm like, I want them to be as proud to come back at 102 and take that picture, I hope, in front of the old well, Mr. Mangle, as you were in 1942 when you were out there with your cap and gown graduating from the greatest public university in the nation. So thank you. An incredible history lesson. I've taken a lot of notes and I'll use some of this material again and again. So question for Nick. Graham, where at Wilson Library can we actually go? Is it in the Farrington room somewhere that we can go and have a chance to pull up some of these from the archives?
There's a lot of them on our website.
Okay.
I'll make sure to share them. And then you can come in, make an appointment, we'll come in, we'll get out photos, we'll get out scrapbooks, get your hands on them.
Great. Well, thank you for the important role that you play in curating these materials for us. So thank you.
Trustee Meekins.
Okay. Have you heard? Joe.
I would invite you all to dinner tonight, but there's one too many of you.
Trustee Davis.
Whereas the Naval Armory of the University of North Carolina and Chapel Hill is an important part of the history of our university and our nation. And whereas the fifth and final pre-flight base was established at the University of North Carolina during World War II, and it was referred to as the gem of pre-flight. And whereas the first African Americans to be commissioned by the United States Navy were members of the B-1 band, and whereas the B-1 band was stationed at the pre-flight school at the University of North Carolina, and the B-1 band played a significant role in the integration of the United States Navy, and whereas many significant historical figures attended the pre-flight school at the University of North Carolina, including but not limited to future presidents of the United States of America, George H.W. Bush and Gerald Ford. And whereas the United States Navy has meaningfully supported and continues to meaningfully support the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And whereas the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill was honored to support and is honored to continue to support the United States Navy and expresses its gratitude for all that the United States Navy has done and continues to do for our university. And whereas the university's 2019 master plan proposed demolition of the Naval Army ROTC, also known as Building 31, now therefore be it resolved that the Board of Trustees of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill hereby amends its 2019 master plan to remove the Naval Armory from the proposed demolition list. And further resolved that the Board of Trustees of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill honors all those who have served the United States of America through the Naval Armory, the United States Navy's pre-flight school, and the United States Navy's ROTC program. That's my proposed resolution.
Any discussion?
I would just like to point out,
Trustee Wayne.
it's a lovely resolution. And thank you all for being here and sharing the stories about your loved ones. And in response to that, Ms. Mason Watson, you made a great point. Your father didn't have a home when he was here. And the Naval ROTC could be that home. Thank you for sharing that.
Any further discussion? Trustee Coates?
There's a lot of story to tell. We just saw a lot of things here today. And when I visit DC and go to different museums, sometimes I'm impacted more by that level of detail than than necessarily a building. I just want to be mindful of what's the best way to honor the pre-flight school and looking at different options, which may be some sort of museum element as part of a project. But just kind of throwing out maybe it's something to study and consider.
I think adding a museum this is, I believe, I don't know that it needs to be a part of the resolution, but I believe adding a museum to a part of the armory makes good sense to allow us to continue to further tell this story of sacrifice, this story of collaboration, this inspiring story of devotion to our nation. So I think it's an outstanding idea. I don't know that it would fit, but I'm happy if you'd like to propose a resolution.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if rather than reference the master plan, which has got a whole process and go through that, if we could maybe modify it to reflect that we'd like to honor and commemorate and look at the best way to do that with the available resources rather than necessarily tying it to, because it may be that a larger building or a different project may be more impactful. I'm not
I guess
sure.
what I would say is I think that when you have an opportunity to have a place it has all of the rich history that the Naval Armory has, the meaningful history both to our university and to our nation. This is really a rare opportunity that we have to preserve this building as a place, almost a sacred place, to remember those who gave the last full measure of devotion for our great nation, for those who have been committed to serving. And so I believe that the appropriate way to do that, I've had so many veterans who've reached out to me saying, please don't tear down the armory. It has so much meaning to us. And for various reasons, I've had people stop by my house and say, hey, I know you're on the board. Please don't tear down the armory. And I think that we're very fortunate to have the opportunity to save this historic structure, to preserve it so that future generations are reminded of the importance of sacrifice, the importance of putting nation and community and others above yourself. This is a building that reminds us of devotion to the most important of our ideals as Americans. So I believe the building should be saved and remain a part of our campus forever.
I'll second your motion.
I will say that I think that preserving it will allow the discussion. Moving forward.
Absolutely.
And then Captain Rizal, you're looking at now, are you satisfied with
Good afternoon. I'm Captain Andrew Hurtel. I run the Naval ROTC program here at Carolina. I also run it at two other schools, Duke and NC State. All excellent institutes of higher learning. I'll let you all sort out arguments on the various sporting fields. But are we satisfied? We are satisfied certainly with the location of the Armory. It is a center of the life of our students. There are a lot of things around Carolina that I know require upgrade and investment. I'm a pragmatic in that way. So is the Armory getting a little bit rough around the edges? It is, but there are a lot of buildings, I think, on campus that are experiencing that as well. But we are happy, absolutely happy with location. One point that I'd highlight is I get to see all three of those schools, Duke, Carolina, and NC State. Again, they're all excellent. But let me highlight in particular, we are at the center of our campus, and the Armory is the home for the experience at Carolina for the Naval program, the Army program, and the Air Force program, and that's tremendous. Similar at NC State, they're at Reynolds Coliseum. If you know, I bet you she knows where that is. Reynolds Coliseum, which is right there in the center of campus, and that's where the ROTC programs are centered. both at Carolina and at NC State, robust, rich, vibrant ROTC programs. Now let's look at Duke for a minute. Duke has their Army program in the center of camp. Duke has kind of two campuses, an East and a West campus. The Army program is centered on East Campus. Rich, vibrant, huge program there at Duke, which is not what you'd expect. Dan can probably elaborate that a little bit. But the Army and the Air Force were often a faraway corner. And our programs are the Air Force and the naval programs at Duke are struggling. Students only come to their offices or the spaces at Duke because they're ordered to, because they have to. I have to kick students out of the Armory here and Reynolds Coliseum at NC State because that is the center of their life here, the center of their college experience. And I'm confident any of the alum here would probably not argue my point there about being kicked out late at night from the Armory. But it is the center of their experience. And to see the juxtaposition of another great school that doesn't have that experience, it's an interesting juxtaposition. As a guy who's on Team Navy and Marine Corps primarily, right? Again, I root for Carolina when the time is right, but I root for Navy all the time, right? So, does that answer your question, ma'am? Okay.
Can I say something?
Yes, sir.
First of all, go Army, beat Navy.
What? Okay.
When I first learned and I started getting all these emails about the Armory and from a lot of passionate folks, particularly alums, I started looking into it. And I think I told you earlier, I came and visited with some of the faculty there in the Armory. And I've been reading the emails and I've been studying this myself and praying about it and thinking about it because my son teaches now, as of last week, taught at the ROTC building there in the Armory with the Army. And so I'm still struggling with myself and I'm not ready to vote on any resolution today. That's just my personal opinion. I don't want to do anything to take away from this wonderful program. It's incredible. And it may be that it's best that we keep that Armory, but I'm not ready to make that type of important decision right now based upon the emotion of this event and also the fact that I haven't fully vetted the situation. So I'm just trying to tell what I think about it right now. I may very well agree with you 100%. I appreciate your resolution. Right. But right now I'm not sure. So my position would be, let's just continue to explore, continue to think about it and make that decision. And I thank you so much for being here.
Sir, we're honored to do it again. I am, although I do have a UNC faculty badge, I am a naval officer first, and serve. I love serving in your Navy. I think it would be also valuable. Colonel Hurd could add a perspective or two of the current state of things as well, since he spends 100% of his time here at Carolina, the lucky guy, but I have to spread myself a little bit thin. So,
ladies and gentlemen, I'm Lieutenant Colonel Dan Hurd. I'm the head of the Army ROTC program here at Carolina. I would just echo what Captain Hertel said, and just to put in perspective the power that history has on the cadets here. So not only are we talking about the pragmatic solution of being at the center of campus being beneficial to both cadets and the civilian students at large, but also the cadets and midshipmen at the Armory, they draw power from that history. I mean, we serve in the Army, in the Navy, and the Air Force on the backs of those before us and in the legacy they've created. And our cadets take a lot of pride in being at the Armory. And I do think that not only is the location unique, but the structure itself does have some power to drive them to push harder when they need to, and to understand that the sacrifices that they are making on a daily basis to do more than just be a student here is something that's expected of them based on the men and women that have come before them, like we have some of them sitting here today. So we appreciate everything you all are doing for us, and thank you.
Just out of curiosity, how many Army ROTC cadets are there now?
So right now we have 75 cadets in the program. We just had our largest commissioning class ever this past Saturday with 23 cadets being commissioned into the Army.
That's great. So in the morning, early, when I'm out running around campus, I see only the Army, like BDUs are. I'm curious. I'm curious though, is that the standard? Are the cadets all wear the same?
Yes, sir. So that is definitely us. We do a lot of stuff in our fatigues, and then we try to bring our Navy partners later PTs.
Ouch. Captain Hertel and Colonel Hurd, thank you for training our next generation of military leaders. We are so fortunate to be on a campus that is as historical as it is. And everywhere you turn on this campus, there are places that, where history just resonates, where so many things have happened. And I think that we need to, certainly have a balance between preserving our history and celebrating our history, as well as continuing to support the mission. And I think the mission of the Armory, in terms of how it is currently configured, it needs some rehab, some upfit, but it certainly seems to work very well in terms of supporting the mission of training our next generation of military leaders. And I think that that's a point that shouldn't be lost on everyone here. So, Trustee Davis, I would have one friendly amendment, and that would be to add language recognizing the B1 band.
In the resolve section, I've got it in the whereas, the joint in the resolve.
Is it in the whereas? Okay, I'm sorry, maybe I didn't hear it. I just wanted to make sure that was certainly in there.
Yes, sir.
And I think going forward, even in the interim, if we could pull the Armory off the demolition list, I think that would go a long way towards calming the nerves of a number of people for whom the Armory is and has been a home base on campus. I know I always think about every student that comes here. I want every student that comes here to find a home base on campus. They need to find a home base where they can base out of and then move forward as they go onto the campus as a whole. For some people, that might be a fraternity or sorority. It might be some other type of group. For these students, the Armory is their home. That is their home base on campus. And the idea of doing something that would disrupt their historical home base, their current home base, is really troubling to me. And I don't think that would be in the best interest of the university. So. Trustee Davis.
If it's also helpful to know, just for the board members who are unaware, in the master plan, there are phases of proposed demolition. One is long-term, one is midterm, and one is near. And near would be happening in the next 3 years. And so this is on the near term. And so I think there is an immediacy to needing to take action. It doesn't mean that it couldn't be reconsidered at some point in the future. Certainly it could. But I say, as opposed to reconsidering in the future, let's go out and try to find the money to restore this extraordinary building, this extraordinary historical structure that can continue to be a home for those who come here and then go forward to serve our great nation in the military. So I would ask everyone to please vote in favor of the resolution.
May I speak?
Trustee
And I hate that we're doing it in this setting, but I would rather do it at least tomorrow to talk about this so we can debate the issue. But was initially and still may be, in fact, in favor of this resolution, but I wasn't aware of it until just now. And I think I made myself clear last meeting that I wasn't going to support any resolutions that I was presented with within a few hours of when I was supposed to vote on it. So I think the university, someone at the university has planned this and talked about it, and it's caused this kind of consternation. I understand that, but I haven't been a part of that discussion, and I don't know what the discussion has been and the reasons for it. So until I hear some of those reasons and maybe can understand what the best solution is, I cannot vote for a resolution just because I'm feeling very patriotic right now because of the emails that I've been getting for the last several months about this. It may very well be the best thing to do to preserve this armory. And I would at least like till tomorrow to think about it. And I'm not going to vote in favor of anything that is presented to me, a few minutes or an hour before I'm going to vote on it. Something that's been on the planning board for 4 years and maybe the best thing for the university. It may not be. I don't know. So if someone can articulate, something better to me, I mean, Chancellor, somebody tell me what's, why it was done to begin with and what's the purpose and what your plan is.
So good questions. And let me just say that I agree with everything that was in Trustee Davis's resolution. I think that I have felt very conflicted over the past several years as I've heard from members of the community. Rob Rivers, I've gotten to know you and your passion for this and many others that have contacted me. And it was originally on that master plan to be demolished in part because phase 3 of the science complex is supposed to go on that parking lot there and the hillside where the armory currently resides. That was reason one. Reason two was we've continued to hear from leaders of ROTC that it's becoming obsolete, that the space is not big enough. It doesn't always meet the needs. The central location is nice, but as we begun looking for alternative sites, it's been to find something over near the Hooker Fields and where some of the training activities take place. So I think many of us has felt conflicted because of the need to grow the campus's footprint around the sciences with the armory being at that location. We understand how important it is and the connection that so many people feel to it. So that's the history. And Nate, I don't know if I've covered it.
Well said.
Okay. And then can I add one more thing? I'm sorry. We are at a really important place in that, as Vice Chancellor Knuckman mentioned earlier today, soon we'll be hiring our new ABC for facilities and operations, and that is an opportunity to perhaps revisit that master plan under new leadership. And so I just wanted to add that into the conversation.
Does the current plan, so the benefits for demolishing the space or the potential phase 3 of the science complex, and then the building's becoming obsolete. So what's the planned home for when the ROTC, in the current plan, is there a new home for the ROTC?
So we have looked at a number of possibilities, and one of those potentially being if the new law school building, when that takes place, that building will become available potentially, and that has been discussed. It's right there near the fields and where there's a lot of the training takes place. But Nate, I know that was one site that we have talked about, but it hasn't gotten very far.
No, we haven't gone very far. I think there's two variables that would ever influence the timing. One would be money. Having the actual dollars to actually build the science complex could force a decision here, and then two, we would never do anything without having that location locked down. So we have started to look through some of those and making sure that it was suitable space and appropriate for all the reasons we've talked about today. And so I think that part, the Chancellor mentioned Van Hecky, which could be an option, but we had talked about some others.
I'm kind of ready.
Thank you. So that means that
I'm not uncomfortable. You want to leave too?
not demolish it unless there's.
Well, I think that all this is doing is removing it from the demolition list. It's not saying what we're going to do with it. So this is all that's doing is removing it from that, because there's a near-term possibility that it would be demolished. It doesn't decide what to do going forward. That's something that we as a board and we as a university community need to talk about and discuss and figure out together with listening to the voices of all stakeholders. And so I think that this resolution does exactly what you are saying already.
Would you accept a friendly amendment to actually say that the demolition will be stayed until address at some later
No,
time.
I want it removed from it's all right, I'll stay it. We're gonna remove it from the list. And if someone in the future wants to do something, I'll just tell you, if you feel emotional about this issue, you should.
Yeah.
This is about patriotism. This is about honoring those who gave their lives or put their lives on the line for each of us. So you should feel emotional about it. And if you're worried that that emotion is causing you to make a bad decision, I say, when it comes to your nation, let your emotion, let your heart guide you. Let
Okay.
your heart guide you.
Well, what I'm saying is it may be, and I haven't sat and talked with any of the folks in the program, and it may be that they would prefer if we could find a nice spot or better spot where we can have closer amenities to what they do, the fields, for instance, and a better building that we might be able to preserve the history at the same time as making that movement. So anyway, my thought is, and I may be the only one here that thinks it, at least let's wait till tomorrow to vote on this so you can have some time to think about it. That's what I'm going to do. Because I don't want to vote against it because I may very well be in favor of it.
Mr. Chairman,
Chris
I
McCall.
call the question.
Trustee McCall.
You can call the question. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, fellow trustees. And thank you for your service to our nation.
I think in my haste and zeal for bringing this forward, there's one more matter of just kind of housekeeping with regards to the minutes from the last meeting.
Motion to approve.
Can I
Second.
get a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. And with that, the Strategic Initiatives Committee meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Great. Since